The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith, Chapter 20. 5 days passed, calm, solitary, but very agreeable days in which he rambled about Palermo, stopping here and there to sit for an hour or so in a cafe or a restaurant and read his guidebooks and the newspapers. He took a carrozza one gloomy day and rode all the way to Monte Pellegrino to visit the fantastic tomb of Santa Rosalia, the patron saint of Palermo, depicted in a famous statue which Tom had seen pictures of in Rome in one of those states of frozen ecstasy that are given other names by psychiatrists. Tom found the tomb vastly amusing. He could hardly keep from giggling when he saw the statue, the lush, reclining female body, the groping hands, the dazed eyes, the parted lips. It was all there but the actual sound of the panting. He thought of Marge. He visited a Byzantine palace, the Palermo Library with its paintings and old cracked manuscripts in glass cases, and studied the formation of the harbor, which was carefully diagrammed in his guidebook. He made a sketch of a painting by Guido Reni for no particular purpose, and memorized a long inscription by Tasso on one of the public buildings. He wrote letters to Bob Delancey and to Cleo in New York, a long letter to Cleo describing his travels, his pleasures, and his multifarious acquaintances with the convincing ardor of Marco Polo describing China. But he was lonely. It was not like the sensation in Paris of being alone yet not alone. He had imagined himself acquiring a bright new circle of friends with whom he would start a new life, with new attitudes, standards, and habits that would be far better and clearer than those he had had all his life. Now he realized it couldn't be. He would have to keep a distance from people, always. He might acquire the different standards and habits, but he could never acquire the circle of friends, not unless he went to Istanbul or Ceylon, and what was the use of acquiring the kind of people he would meet in those places? He was alone, and it was a lonely game he was playing. The friends he might make were most of the danger, of course. If he had to drift around the world entirely alone, so much the better. There was that much less chance that he would be found out. That was one cheerful aspect of it anyway, and he felt better having thought of it. He altered his behavior slightly to accord with the role of a more detached observer of life. He was still courteous and smiling to everyone, to people who wanted to borrow his newspaper in restaurants and to clerks he spoke to in the hotel. But he carried his head even higher, and he spoke a little less when he spoke. There was a faint air of sadness about him now. He enjoyed the change. He imagined that he looked like a young man who had had an unhappy love affair or some kind of emotional disaster and was trying to recuperate in a civilized way by visiting some of the more beautiful places on the earth. That reminded him of Capri. The weather was still bad, but Capri was Italy. That glimpse he had had of Capri with Dickie had only whetted his appetite. Christ, had Dickie been a bore that day. Maybe he should hold out until summer, he thought, hold the police off until then. But even more than Greece and the Acropolis, he wanted one happy holiday in Capri and to hell with culture for a while. He had read about Capri in winter, wind, rain, and solitude, but still Capri. There was Tiberius's Leap and the Blue Grotto, the plaza without people but still the plaza, and not a cobblestone changed. He might even go today. He quickened his steps toward his hotel. The lack of tourists hadn't detracted from the Côte d'Azur. Maybe he could fly to Capri. He had heard of a seaplane service from Naples to Capri. If the seaplane wasn't running in February, he could charter it. What was money for? Buongiorno, come sta? He greeted the clerk behind the desk with a smile. A letter for you, signore. Un gentilissimo, the clerk said, smiling too. It was from Dickie's bank in Naples. Inside the envelope was another envelope from Dickie's trust company in New York. Tom read the letter from the Naples bank first. 10 February. Most esteemed Senor, it has been called to our attention by the Wendell Trust Company of New York that there exists a doubt whether your signature of receipt of your remittance of $500 of January last is actually your own. We hasten to inform you so that we may take the necessary action. We have already deemed it proper to inform the police, but we await your confirmation of the opinion of our Inspector of Signatures and of the Inspector of Signatures of the Wendell Trust Company of New York. Any information you may be able to give will be most appreciated, and we urge you to communicate with us at your earliest possible convenience. Most respectfully and obediently yours, Emilio de Briganzi, Segretario Generale della Banca di Napoli. P.S. In the case that your signature is in fact valid, we urge you despite this to visit our offices in Naples as soon as possible in order to sign your name again for our permanent records. We enclose a letter to you sent in our care from the Wendell Trust Company. Tom ripped open the Trust Company's letter. 5 February. Dear Mr. Greenleaf, our Department of Signatures has reported to us that in its opinion your signature of January on your regular monthly remittance number 8747 is invalid. Believing this may for some reason have escaped your notice, we are hastening to inform you so that you may confirm the signing signing of the said check or confirm our opinion that the said check has been forged. We have called this to the attention of the Bank of Naples also. Enclosed is a card for our permanent signature file which we request you to sign and return to us. Please let us hear from you as soon as possible. Sincerely, Edward T. Kavanagh, Secretary. Tom wet his lips. He'd write to both banks that he was not missing any money at all, but would that hold them off for long? He had signed 3 remittances beginning in December. Were they going to go back and check on all his signatures now? Would an expert be able to tell that all 3 signatures were forged? Tom went upstairs and immediately sat down at the typewriter. He put his sheet of hotel stationery into the roller and sat there for a moment staring at it. They wouldn't rest with this, he thought. If they had a board of experts looking at signatures with magnifying glasses and all that, they probably would be able to tell that the 3 signatures were forgeries. But they were such damned good forgeries, Tom knew. He'd signed the January remittance a little fast, he remembered, but it wasn't a bad job or he never would have sent it off. He would have told the bank he lost the remittance and would have had them send him another. Most forgeries took months to be discovered, he thought. Why had they spotted this one in 4 weeks? Wasn't it because they were checking on him in every department of his life since the Freddie Miles murder and the San Remo boat story? They wanted to see him personally in the Naples bank. Maybe some of the men there knew Dickie by sight. A terrible tingling panic went over his shoulders and down his legs. For a moment he felt weak and helpless, too weak to move. He saw himself confronted by a dozen policemen, Italian and American, asking him where Dickie Greenleaf was and being unable to produce Dickie Greenleaf or tell them where he was, or prove that he existed. He imagined himself trying to sign H. Richard Greenleaf under the eyes of a dozen handwriting experts and going to pieces suddenly and not being able to write at all. He brought his hands up to the typewriter keys and forced himself to begin. He addressed the letter to the Wendell Trust Company of New York. 12 February. Dear Sirs, in regard to your letter concerning my January remittance, I signed the check in question myself and received the money in full. If I had missed the check, I should of course have informed you at once. I am enclosing the card with my signature for your permanent record as you requested. Sincerely, H. Richard Greenleaf. He signed Dickie's signature several times on the back of the trust company's envelope before he signed his letter and then the card. Then he wrote a similar letter to the Naples Bank and promised to call at the bank within the next 2 days and sign his name again for their permanent record. He marked both envelopes urgentissimo, went downstairs and bought stamps from the porter and posted them. Then he went out for a walk. His desire to go to Capri had vanished. It was 4:15 in the afternoon. He kept walking aimlessly. Finally, he stopped in front of an antique shop window and stared for several minutes at a gloomy oil painting of 2 bearded saints descending a dark hill in moonlight. He went into the shop and bought it for the first price the man quoted to him. It was not even framed, and he carried it rolled up under his arm back to his hotel.